Welcome to the Child and Adult Care Food Program Annual Training for Oregon CACFP sponsors. This training was released in fiscal year 2020.
I'm Jessica Vasinski, a child nutrition specialist with the Oregon Department of Education Child Nutrition Programs Community Team.
And I am Shirley Wu, also a child nutrition specialist with ODE CNP's community team. We will be presenting the CACFP annual training in this video.
Before that, we have a short message from the Oregon Department of Education. ODE supports equity and excellence for every learner and seeks to work with school districts, education service districts, and community partners like you. We believe all children should have access to a high-quality, well-rounded learning experience. Our stance is that education equity is the equitable implementation of policy, practices, procedures, and legislation that translates into resource allocation, education rigor, and opportunities for historically and currently marginalized youth, students, and families, including civil rights protected classes. This means the restructuring and dismantling of systems and institutions that create the dichotomy of beneficiaries and the oppressed and marginalized.
Let's start with the annual training requirements. This training is part of your fiscal year 2021 renewal requirements. All food program coordinators and authorized representatives are required to complete the annual training requirements. This training must be completed by September 1st, 2020. Completing your CACFP annual training requirements include viewing this entire training, viewing the civil rights training on the ODE CNP CACFP training webpage. The link is available in the description section under this video, and completing a Google form quiz. The quiz will include 10 questions that are part of this training and 2 verification statements that you will check off. Once you submit your quiz, you will have completed your CACFP annual training. Certificates will be sent out by September 30th, 2020. The link is also available in the description section under this video. All links are also available in the memo that was sent out regarding annual training. If you have questions about these requirements, please contact your assigned child nutrition specialist. Additional resources were also sent out along with your memo, including a policy and procedure template and a sample meal count policy and procedure. These resources will be mentioned later on in this training. You are not required to turn in any written policies and procedures for this fiscal year, but this template may be helpful as you start creating written policies down the line. Now let's jump into our training. The fiscal year 2021 annual training will focus on policies and procedures and internal controls. Here is a quick overview of our agenda today. We will review the purpose and objectives for the training, discuss performance standards, define internal controls, review control activities, and provide a discussion around those activities. We will walk you through an activity which will help you to create a meal count policy and procedure and review some frequently asked questions. The purpose of today's training is not only to meet the annual CACFP training requirements, but also to understand the regulatory requirements for CACFP administration, help you as sponsors to strengthen your operation of the CACFP, and finally help you to prepare for ODE CNP's upcoming fiscal year 2021 requirements. Through this training, we hope that you will learn why performance standards are important, learn the basics of internal controls, understand the definitions of policy and procedure, and practice creating a procedure that meets CACFP guidelines.
First, we're going to look at the CACFP performance standards. Before we define the performance standards, let's see what you already know from previous trainings and information. First, which one of the following choices are not a performance standard for the CACFP? A. Financial viability, B, managerial hierarchy, C, administrative capability, or D, program accountability? If you aren't sure, make your best guess. This is all in an effort to learn more about these regulations. The answer is B, managerial hierarchy. Managerial hierarchy is not one of the CACFP performance standards. So, from our knowledge question, we know that the performance standards for CACFP include financial viability, administrative capability, and program accountability. This is better known as VCA. Some of you may remember trainings on integrity regulations with the acronym VAC, or Viability, Accountability, and Capability. These trainings discuss the same regulations and requirements that we'll discuss today, just in a different way. That means that these concepts should not be new for many of you. The idea of program integrity is one that has been the basis of the CACFP for a long time, and the act of determining a sponsor's financial viability, administrative capability, and program accountability helps to ensure that programs will meet performance standards and maintain a well-run and successful program. If you're unfamiliar with VCA, that's okay. USDA and ODE have committed to making VCA more of a focus in our trainings, renewals, and reviews, so the concept will soon become very familiar to you. Our first performance standard in VCA is financial viability. By definition, a sponsor must expend and account for all program funds in accordance with the CACFP regulations. 7 CFR 226.6, FNS Instruction 796-2, Revision 4, 2 CFR 200, Subpart D, and 2 CFR Parts 400 and 415. That's a lot of individual regulations to remember, so let's look at this standard in more depth. For a sponsor to demonstrate that they are a financially viable organization for the CACFP, they must meet specific criteria. First, USDA states that a sponsor must adequately document their description of need or recruitment. This piece will really speak to our family daycare home sponsors, as they are considered sponsoring organizations of multiple independent daycare homes or sites. A description of need or recruitment means that the organization has appropriate practices for recruiting sites and the means to employ adequate staff to meet the ratios of monitors to facilities. If you're not part of a family daycare home, this first bullet will pertain less to your organization. However, the next two will definitely apply to all sponsors. Sponsors must demonstrate that they have adequate fiscal resources and financial history, in addition to appropriately documenting that costs in the CACFP budget are necessary, reasonable, and allowable. While single-site sponsors do not have to submit a budget to ODE-C&P, sponsors should understand that budgets are often a necessary financial tool when running an organization. But don't just leave it to ODE to determine your organization's financial viability. It's crucial that you determine it for yourself. Ask yourself, can your organization continue to cover the daily costs of your program if there's a sudden stoppage in USDA funding? Think it can't happen? It has. Government shutdowns and stoppages of funds are not unheard of. That is why it's so important to ensure your organization's viability. CACFP reimbursements cannot be the sole basis of your funding, and this question definitely highlights that fact. Next, ask yourself, are the costs that you charge to the CACFP necessary, meaning are they needed for your child and adult care food program to function? Are they reasonable? Would a prudent person pay this amount or create this expense? Would a prudent person charge this cost to CACFP? So what is a prudent person? Well, by definition, a prudent person is one who uses good judgment or common sense in practical matters. Next, consider if your costs are allowable. Does the cost conform to the requirements of the CACFP, or is it a cost directly benefiting the CACFP? And finally, are the costs appropriately documented? Do you have invoices, receipts, pay stubs, contracts, etc.? And finally, is the financial management system that your organization currently has adequate to accurately account for your CACFP income and expenses? While you do not need to have a separate checking account for CACFP expenses and revenue must be kept separate from other revenue or expenses. Each of these questions will guide you to explore your own financial viability and can and should be revisited regularly. Okay, now you have some financial viability facts under your belt, and we'll start our first knowledge and activity question. Which one of these choices is not a way to show financial viability? Is it A, making sure all costs charged to the CACFP are necessary, reasonable, allowable, and appropriately documented? B, documenting a history of excessive debts for your organization? C, having a budget approved by ODE-CNP? Or D, having sufficient funds to pay staff in case of temporary disruptions in funding from USDA? Think about it for a few seconds. The answer? B, documenting a history of excessive debts for your organization. If an organization has a history of excessive debts, it certainly does not indicate financial viability. In fact, it would indicate that there was a marked lack of financial viability. Let's move on to our second performance standard, administrative capability. To demonstrate administrative capability, the management practices of a sponsor must be appropriate and effective to ensure that operations are in accordance with CACFP regulations. How can a sponsor show that they are administratively capable? By having an adequate number of qualified and trained staff, ensuring the effective operation of the center or site, employing sufficient staff to manage the requirements of the program, for example, enough monitors to meet the ratios of monitors to facilities, having program policies and procedures in writing, making sure that program responsibilities and duties are assigned, and ensuring compliance with USDA child nutrition civil rights requirements. Again, while ODE-CNP will consider all of the requirements that we just discussed to determine whether a sponsor is administratively capable, your organization should also ask yourselves the following to conduct a bit of a self-evaluation. Are your management practices for CACFP effective? Are the management practices currently used in the CACFP at your organization helping to ensure a successful program that meets regulation? Do you have the right people in the right positions? Do staff have adequate skills, knowledge, and abilities to operate the program in accordance with regulations? And finally, do you have written policies and procedures? Not only do you have them, but do you use them? Does your staff use them? Are they followed as written, or do they need revision? If all of your staff were out with the flu, could someone step in and successfully follow your policies and procedures? Examining each of these questions can lead you to a more capable program overall. Let's check your knowledge. Marigold Charter School has a written policy and procedure handbook with a section on all CACFP responsibilities and duties for their after-school at-risk program. But when their food program coordinator conducted a monitoring review on one of their sites, she found the staff was not following those written procedures. Is Marigold Charter School meeting the performance standard of administrative capability? Take a few seconds to write down your answer. Did you get the answer right? You probably guessed that they are not being very administratively capable. Having written policies and procedures is great, but remember that a sponsor needs staff who are qualified and able to carry out the procedures of the CACFP. In addition, a sponsor needs to ensure that the staff they have are adequately trained and supported in carrying out those procedures. And if expectations are not being met, the sponsor needs a process for correcting the areas of noncompliance. If you're a sponsor with only a single site, you're not required to monitor and document your sites. However, it is always best practice to make sure that all staff are trained and capable of conducting required CACFP duties. The final performance standard of VCA is program accountability. As a means of ensuring fiscal accountability and program compliance, an organization must have controls and management systems in place. To do this, sponsors will need to maintain documentation showing that nonprofit organizations that are not school districts are governed by an independent board of directors. For-profits are not required to have a governing board of directors. That funds are properly safeguarded and used. Records are kept in all required CACFP areas and available for review. Operation requirements such as training and monitoring are being met. And meal pattern meal service claims and other operational pieces are in compliance. So again, here is an opportunity for some self-evaluation and reflection. Ask yourself, do you have effective internal controls in those key areas of CACFP operations? Financially, does integrity exist for all expenses? Are claims processed accurately and in a timely manner? Are there safeguards and double checks in place to ensure adherence to regulations? If you're a nonprofit organization and not a school district, is your board independent and are they providing adequate oversight of the CACFP? Do they understand the program and its requirements to be able to provide that oversight? Is the CACFP discussed at board meetings and are meeting minutes saved to the document of discussion? Is your organization putting systems in place to complete site monitoring accurately and within the required timeframes? Finally, are there controls in place to ensure that records are maintained for 3 years plus the current year? That was a lot to take in, but now it's time to get ready for some more knowledge checks. A for-profit CACFP sponsor would not be required to have which of the following to show program accountability? Is it A, meal count records, B, food and other program expense receipts, C, written policies and procedures related to CACFP operations, or D, a governing board? Do you know the answer? This is a tricky one. The answer is D, a governing board of directors. Remember, a governing board is only required for nonprofit organizations that are not school districts. Here's one we've seen before. Which one of the following choices are not a performance standard for the CACFP? A, financial viability, B, managerial hierarchy, C, administrative capability, or D, program accountability? Feel better about your answer now? Yes, the answer is B. Managerial hierarchy is not a performance standard for CACFP. Great job in learning more about our 3 CACFP performance standards.
Now that you understand the performance standards, let's dive a little deeper into the concept of internal controls. Internal controls are a critical step in effectively operating an organization. Not only are they required by regulation, but they can help in program performance and allow an organization to be proactive and strategic in their operations. Okay, that all sounds good, right? But what are internal controls really all about? Well, as we learned previously, internal controls are a key component of program accountability, the 3rd performance standard. These controls act as a system of checks and balances to ensure that the policies and procedures that you have set up for your organization are really working effectively to help you meet CACFP requirements. Internal controls are there to help your organization achieve the intended results without fraud or abuse, making sure at each step along the way that things are running consistent with policies and procedures. To break this down further, there are 5 elements associated with internal controls: the control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. Let's look at each in more depth. The control environment is often known as the tone at the top. The only way to ensure that requirements are met and procedures followed is to model the importance of these requirements. This starts at the top of the organizational chart. Management, leadership, and even the board of directors must understand and model respect for and adherence to the federal requirements. Once the tone has been set, it is important to look at the CACFP program as a whole and do a risk assessment of each area or section of the program. This will allow the sponsor to highlight any areas, tasks, or steps that may lead to error. These are areas in which the procedures are the weakest and where controls must be built in. When completing the risk assessment, look at the systems currently in place, follow the procedures and processes currently completed, and audit the documents currently used. Finding weak areas or potential risks will help improve the program as a whole. Next are the controls. For CACFP, these controls translate into your written policies and procedures. Think of them as a guide for your staff to help them in understanding their role in the CACFP and steps that they must take in that role to ensure compliance. Creating written policies and procedures help to ensure that your program is strong and successful and demonstrates that the organization is both capable and accountable, 2 of our performance standards. But really, let's be honest, it takes a lot more than just writing policies and procedures, printing them out, and then storing them in a binder in the back of a file cabinet somewhere. Policies and procedures will do nothing for you if they are not communicated and followed. It is crucial to have a set and consistent plan for informing all staff responsible for CACFP duties about the expectations you have of them in their jobs. It is equally important to communicate the procedures required to meet those expectations. Think about how and when these communications will happen. Will there be an all-staff meeting at the beginning of the year to discuss the policies of the CACFP and the procedures to run the program correctly? If so, how will employees hired in the middle of the year learn this information? How will changes to the policies and procedures be communicated to make sure that everyone is on the same page? These questions help you to build your plan. Finally, the last piece of creating internal controls relies on monitoring. The reality is that monitoring is the most important piece in the process. Without monitoring, a sponsor will never know if policies and procedures are working. In fact, the first time that they might hear of a problem is when a reviewer calls a finding and takes fiscal action for an error. To avoid this, it is important to periodically check and evaluate the procedures that you have put into place in the CACFP at your sites. Doing spot checks during meal services, reviewing a claim submission, or even sitting with a staff member as they review supporting documentation for a menu are all great ways to evaluate whether procedures are being followed. If errors are being found, the next step is to ask, why? Why did the error happen? Why wasn't it caught? Why? Continue asking why until you are able to pinpoint the broken link in the chain. This gives you an opportunity to revise the procedure, put in those internal controls, and start the process all over again. The cycle of internal controls is one that is in motion, always doing, reviewing, and improving to ensure success in meeting the regulations. Okay, more knowledge checks. Are you feeling stronger in these concepts? Here is a question for you. Which is not one of the 5 elements of internal controls? Is it A, monitoring, B, control activities, C, risk assessment, or D, management evaluations? Think you know the answer? The answer is D, management evaluations. Did you get it right? Here's another one. What would be considered a control activity? Is it A, writing policies and procedures for meal counts? B, controlling the behavior of participants in your care? C, writing down all the activities that you do for CACFP? Or D, ensuring all controls in place are working? So this is a tough one. The correct control activity listed is A, writing policies and procedures for meal counts. While some of the other options are part of other elements in internal controls, writing policies and procedures falls directly under control activities.
Policies and procedures are the backbone of the CACFP and provide a written guide of what needs to happen and the steps to make that happen. Let's examine the three key elements. First, the policy acts as the what. Essentially, what do you have to do to meet CACFP regulation? Next, the procedure lays out the how. How will you get to the what? What steps do you need to take? And finally, verification is the check, the double check, if you will, to ensure that the steps laid out and taken will truly help you to get to the what. So we have our what, our how, and our check. Breaking policies and procedures down into the what, how, and check make them seem rather simplistic, but as any organization or business will admit, the writing of those elements is not as easy as one may think. Here is a map for determining the what, laying out the how, and incorporating the check. First, an organization should always refer back to the CACFP Policy and Procedures Manual and CACFP regulations to figure out the what that needs to be addressed. These are your policies and the standard that you as a sponsor of the program are held to. Next, you'll need to look at your organization and determine how your staff will apply these policies into daily operation. Once that is done, you'll lay out the step-by-step processes to meet each of the policies. These will be your procedures. Finally, before you're done, it's important to incorporate a double check within your procedure to act as your check to verify that the procedure is followed correctly. But maybe all of this is still a bit confusing. Let's take an example and put these steps into action. Little Leapers Childcare is in the process of developing procedures to meet the CACFP policies. They have reviewed the regulations and know that they need to write a procedure to ensure that the meal counts that they take on a daily basis are accurate. Let's walk through the steps that Little Leapers takes to do this. In step 1, Little Leapers will research the CACFP Policy and Procedures Manual and CACFP regulations to find the policy on meal counts. They find in Chapter 5, Section C of the manual the following CACFP requirement. The manual can be found on the ODE C&P's public CACFP webpage. The policy states, meal counts must be taken at the point of service. Diving a little deeper into the manual, we find out that the point of service is when the participant has received a complete reimbursable meal. So this becomes our what. This is the policy.
Now let's look at how Little Leapers develops their how, or their procedure. First, in step 2, Little Leapers examines their organization and how the policy will fit into their daily operations. Here are some things that they noted as they reviewed their own operations. Little Leapers operates 4 classrooms for children 2 and older. Meals are prepared in the on-site kitchen and delivered to each classroom where they are served family style. Take a moment to think about how the meal service style might affect the meal count procedure and the variations between different meal service styles. The CACFP Center Policy Manual Chapter 5 lets us know. The point of service meal count must be taken as the participant leaves the cafeteria line in cafeteria style, or before the participant leaves the table in family and restaurant style. Finally, Little Leapers notes that at least 2 staff, a teacher and an assistant, are available during lunch service. Next, Little Leapers will take the information they have about their organization's lunch service and develop a procedure to help staff adhere to the policy. Remember, the policy is that meal counts must be taken at the point of service. Here are the steps that they have laid out. Kitchen staff will deliver the meal carts with all meal components and serving dishes to each classroom 5 minutes prior to mealtime. At the designated mealtime, the classroom assistant will ensure all participants wash and dry hands while the teacher checks all meal components are present. Teachers will place all serving dishes with utensils on the table while the classroom assistant gets the participants seated. At least one teacher will sit at each table with the participants. Once all food items are on the table, the participants may begin serving themselves. The classroom assistant will take the meal count while participants are seated by counting the number of participants at the table who are receiving a reimbursable meal and putting the total number in the box next to the appropriate meal type on the meal count form. Staff meals are tallied in the staff meal column. Remember that although some of these steps may seem like they should be obvious, procedures should be written so that someone who has no prior knowledge of the process could follow the steps successfully. And of course, once they have the how, Little Leapers will make sure that they include a check. This is the verification that the procedure is being followed accurately and that it will meet CACFP regulations. With that in mind, Little Leapers has built in the following double check system. The classroom assistant will verbally verify with the teacher that the meal count for participants receiving a reimbursable meal is accurate. The teacher will review the meal count form and double check that it is complete prior to the end of the meal service, and then initial next to the meal count to show that they agree with the meal count taken. If for any reason the meal count is not taken while children are seated at the table with all meal components on the table, the meals are unallowable and the teacher will write an NA in the appropriate meal count box and write in a reason on the bottom of the form. All meal counts must be turned in to the director each week on Friday by 4 p.m. Additional verification checks can be taken as well. Perhaps when the director is consolidating the claim, they will verify that all NA meal counts have a written explanation on the form. Additionally, monitoring visits or meal observations are great spot checks to ensure that the procedure is being followed and the meal count is being taken correctly. There are a few other key elements to consider when putting together this meal count procedure, or any procedure you create. Jessica will guide you through this template, which pulls some of those key elements out of the procedure to re-emphasize them. This sample meal count procedure was sent out with your annual training memo.
Let's look at the Who section, which asks for the position or title responsible for steps within the procedure. For some procedures, this may be just one person, but for other more complicated procedures, there may be different people responsible for different steps. In our example, the Little Leapers have indicated that the responsible staff are the classroom teachers, the classroom assistants, and the director. Then there is the when. This may be the timing of the procedure or the time frame for completion. Little Leapers have indicated that the when of this procedure is daily during each meal service, and they have noted those meal services, breakfast, lunch, and PM snack, so the procedure must occur during each of these meal services. Finally is the where. Where are the documents ultimately going to be stored? For this procedure, the documents are the meal count forms themselves. The where is important not only for the organization to know on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis, but it's very important to know when an administrative review rolls around, since specialists will be asking for many of an organization's CACFP documents. Little Leapers has noted that the meal count forms will be maintained in each individual classroom during the week, but then submitted to the director's office each Friday. When reviewing the steps that were developed for Little Leapers procedure, each of these key elements were mentioned. But again, this template helps to ensure that the most important pieces of a procedure are there and highlighted.
Thanks, Jessica. That's a lot of great information. It really illustrates the importance of control activities like written policies and procedures and the role that they play in a sponsor's program accountability.
They are important. In fact, the reason that ODE CNP chose these topics for the CACFP annual training is to inform sponsors of the expectations that ODE CNP will have in the coming years.
Yes, written policies and procedures will be required for all Oregon CACFP sponsors over the next few years. ODE CNP will be providing more information on required written procedures during application renewals in fall 2020. This training and additional resources are meant to provide information and practice in writing procedures that meet the needs of the CACFP. The homework from this training will give each of you a chance to flex your procedure writing muscles and follow the steps that Little Leapers Childcare took with your own programs.
Writing good policies really comes down to a sponsor's comprehension of the USDA CACFP requirements and how to incorporate those requirements in your programs effectively and efficiently.
Absolutely. And it can't be said enough that well-written policies and procedures are the foundation of good internal controls.
I think it's also important to emphasize that viability, capability, and accountability don't just end once the policy and procedure are written.
Nope. Sponsors need to consider where the information will be stored, how it will be communicated to staff via training, and how the execution of the procedures will be monitored on a day-to-day basis.
Right. ODE CNP is not only going to expect sponsors to provide policies and procedures during renewal, but we're going to be evaluating whether the sponsor staff are following those procedures when we come out for reviews.
That is why we are providing you with a template that can be used to develop your own policy and procedure. This is the same format that was used in our meal count policy and procedure example for Little Leapers. While you are welcome to use your own templates, make sure that any written policies and procedures for CACFP include a what, which is the policy, a who, when, where, how, and check. But first, let's complete a few more knowledge and activity questions. Which of the following would be considered a policy? Is it A, menus will meet meal pattern requirements? B, meal accommodations for participants with disabilities will be accommodated? C, the center will operate a nonprofit food service? Or D, all of the above? The correct answer is D. All of the above are examples of policies. Okay, question 8. Writing a good procedure will require knowledge of A, CACFP regulations and requirements, B, your organization's daily operations, C, both A and B, or D, none of the above. Right, the answer is C. You need to know both CACFP regulations and requirements and your organization's daily operations. Now let's try and write our own. You can follow along by using the sample template that was provided. While you do not need to turn in any policy and procedure at this time, this would be a good exercise. Jessica will walk you through the steps we have discussed for developing your own policy and procedure.
Remember that the what is your policy, the how is your procedure, and the check is the verification or double check that the procedure is done accurately. The who is the specific staff or position responsible for the procedure. This could be more than one person. The when is the timing of the procedure or time frame when it should be completed. And the where indicates the storage location of the documentation required to show and prove your VCA. Please remember that your procedure may not look like our example, and that's okay. In fact, we expect that it will look different. That's because each sponsor will have different program structures that need to be met. Do not simply copy our procedure or someone else's, because it will not be a procedure that you or your staff can effectively implement into your own organization. Also, sponsors absolutely must actively practice implementing procedures. Determine the policies, write the procedures, and then put them into practice. This is the only way to ensure that your organization is successful in the CACFP. So let's consider some questions that we receive about procedures. Do I really need a verification check? I'm often short-staffed and we don't have staff to double check during mealtimes.
And the answer is yes. Verification checks are important to ensure internal controls are in place. We all make mistakes, so having someone who can double check the accuracy of your meal counts is very important. Sometimes this may require changes to your current practices. However, if done correctly, this can help you save money by having more accurate claims.
I have one classroom that uses restaurant style and multiple classrooms that use family style meal service. Do I need to write 2 separate meal count procedures?
While the easy answer would be to say no, the right answer is that it is a good idea to have 2 separate meal count procedures. This ensures that staff understand what they are meant to do in any of the classrooms. We recommend labeling both procedures for the classrooms to prevent errors or confusion.
Great. Okay, third question. Some of the participants at our center are not being counted in our meal counts since they do not receive reimbursable meals. Do my meal count procedures need to take this into account?
Absolutely. Non-reimbursable meals can happen for many reasons. Some participants may have parents who bring their entire meals. Other participants may have a special dietary need that is not due to a disability but results in a non-creditable meal. The purpose of the whole procedure is to create an accurate meal count. This will include what to do in instances when a meal is not reimbursable or when a meal cannot or is not being claimed. If you are using actual counts, the procedure could say that the column or row of the participant will be crossed out to indicate that their meals should not be counted as part of the reimbursable meal count. Again, this will be individual to your organization's needs, but consider all possibilities when you do your initial risk assessments.
Let's talk a little more about actual counts. I'm currently taking head counts, but my specialist is telling me that I have to take actual counts and count off each meal for each participant like an attendance sheet. Why do I have to do that?
There are many reasons why your specialist may ask you to do this. You may be serving more than 2 meals and 1 snack, or 2 snacks and 1 meal. You may be serving at-risk after-school students and child care center kids at the same time. You may have special dietary needs that don't always meet the meal pattern, and your frontline staff may not have been taught how to disallow meals during the point of service meal counts, and you need a way to figure out which meals to disallow. Or you may have had findings around meal counts during your last administrative review.
Okay, probably the question on everyone's mind. Meal counts are important, but do I really need to have written policies and procedures for all aspects of running CACFP?
The answer is that major aspects of CACFP will require a written policy and procedures. Some of these areas include developing menus, creating OMERs, recording daily attendance, site monitoring, following nonprofit food service requirements, and more. In general, the guidance is if you, the food program coordinator or authorized representative, go on a 3-month vacation tomorrow, will a new staff person be able to run CACFP effectively without a written policy and procedure in place? In most major aspects of CACFP, most probably not. Therefore, a policy and procedure must be written for key CACFP management functions. ODE CNP will not require you to submit all your written policies and procedures at this time, but we will be rolling out requirements for submission over the next few years. To recap, today we defined and discussed the 3 performance standards: financial viability, administrative capability, and program accountability, or VCA for short. We reviewed VCA's connection to program integrity and went deeper to learn more about how internal controls support these performance standards, and especially both administrative capability and program accountability. From the 5 elements of internal controls, we focused in on control activities, and especially written policies and procedures. Policies and procedures are written guides that include the what, or the policy, the how, which is the procedure, and the check, verification that the procedure is followed and meets regulations.
Let's wrap up with 2 more knowledge and activity questions. First, performance standards are meant to ensure what in the CACFP? Is the answer A, program integrity, B, financial solvency, C, additional paperwork, or D, monitoring proficiency? Take a few seconds to decide. Did you get it right? The answer is A, performance standards are meant to ensure program integrity in the CACFP. Okay, last one. A complete written policy and procedure includes what 3 key elements? Are they A, the who, the what, and the why, B, the who, the why, and the how, C, the what, the how, and the check, or D, the where, the how, and the why? You've got this. The answer is C. A complete written policy and procedure includes the what, the how, and the check. Great job!
Fantastic! To wrap up today's training, let's look at the annual training requirements. First, both the food program coordinator and the authorized representative must complete annual training. The steps for this year are: view the entire policies and procedures training, which you have just done. Congratulations! Next, you will need to view the civil rights training posted on the ODE CACFP training webpage. There is a link to this training in the YouTube description section below and in the annual training memo. Once you have done this, you will need to complete the Google form quiz. The food program coordinator and the authorized representative must both complete this quiz by September 1st, 2020, in order to complete the annual training requirements. If you do have questions, please reach out to your assigned child nutrition specialist. Thank you for watching the CACFP annual training video.